Okay, I'm recording my homily for the fourth Sunday in Ordinary Time, and we've got a little bit of snow. Very beautiful day, very bright. I should have brought my sunglasses. So this week I talk about a very serious topic, and I felt like the first reading really lent itself to that. It's a reading from Jeremiah where, if there ever was a reading in the world that seemed to speak to this particular moral issue, it is certainly this one. And actually, I'll get to that in a second. But just to go a little bit, so if you've ever heard the expression that insanity, and I know this is kind of a humorous take on it, but insanity is when a person does something over and over and over again the same way, but expects their results to change, right? Because if you do it the exact same way, the results will always be the same. So insanity is expecting something to change when there's really not a good reason for it to change. So it's when logic doesn't follow. It doesn't make sense that it would change, right? So I want to talk about a spiritual way that happens, so I'm going to call it spiritual insanity. Spiritual insanity is when a person tries to kill love. It doesn't make sense. As a human being, why would anyone want to do that, right? So spiritual, wow, it is really bright. Spiritual insanity is someone who tries to kill love, okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Now, just look at the gospel, right? So you have Jesus in his hometown. He's in Nazareth. He's in the synagogue. He's proclaiming from the prophet Isaiah, and he tells everybody, today this scripture passage is fulfilled in your hearing. In other words, he's the fulfillment of it. And it's a beautiful scripture passage, so they're like, okay, this is exciting, this is great, wonderful, but there's a problem. He's Joseph's son, right? That's what they say. Who does he think he is? Everything he says sounds great, but who does he, wait a minute. So Jesus begins to respond not by softening it up and saying, no, I'm just kidding, guys. I'm just a great guy, but I'm not saying anything necessarily about, that I'm God or anything like that. He doesn't do that, right? So he gives two examples to prove that they need to elevate their love, okay? So the first example is that they need to understand that God chose first and foremost to love a widow who was a foreigner. She wasn't one of them. And so when all the people were struggling in the famine, he chose this foreigner to help through Elijah. And then when the plague of leprosy is going through the land, he only helps a foreigner, Naaman. And so their love has to understand that God's love expands out to everybody. There's not these clear-cut boundaries that we can just chop and say, okay, we don't have to love these people. And so what was their response then to Jesus on that? They hate him. They try to kill him. And so they begin to engage in spiritual insanity. They try to kill love. I've talked a couple times a while back about how we in my former parish took a youth group to New York City to do some evangelization, to do some work, to work with the Sisters of Charity or the Missionaries of Charity, and it was a great experience. But on one of the last days, we took them down to the 9/11 memorial, and that was a powerful experience. Now, you remember the day that 9/11 happened? So I was in the seminary. It was in the morning. We were going into Mass, and so we heard about some things, but it was just rumors. So when Mass was over, everybody got out and went down into the TV room in our dorm building. And when I went in there, I began to watch what was happening, and within a couple seconds I left. I couldn't handle it. My heart couldn't handle it. You see, when I was in the seminary, in my life, I've always struggled with loving my enemies. I've always struggled with that. I've always struggled with being judgmental. I have a lot of pride. And there was this moment when I saw what was happening. I knew if I kept watching it, if I kept watching these planes crashing into these buildings, and the mind is trying to understand what's going on, but I knew if I kept watching, my heart would be filled with hatred. And so out of that fear of that hatred, I couldn't watch. So there we are many years later down at the 9/11 memorial. And you're walking through that room where they have the 8.5 by 11 photos, pictures of every single person that died that day. And my first feeling as I walked through that room was just shame. It was almost like I was looking at them face to face, and they were like, you couldn't even watch us die. I mean, if there was any act of charity, you turned your back on us. Why couldn't you at least have paid attention to what was happening? But you walked away. And so I felt really guilty in that moment that I could not overcome my fear of the hatred. And so in a sense, the hatred was more powerful. My love wasn't enough. Well, if you go down to the 9/11 memorial, there's also a brand new building. They call it the One World Trade Center. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. And so they built this building in the place of the 2 trade centers that came down. Why did they build the building? Was it for financial reasons? Was it like, we're losing revenue, so we're going to build a new building? No, we as human beings, we're not quite that practical when something like this happens. It was meant to be a statement. It was meant to be a statement that when spiritual insanity attacks us, we attack back. It was to prove that the value and dignity of every single human life in those buildings mattered. Every single one of them. And so that memorial is meant to be a statement, including that brand new building, that spiritual insanity is evil and wrong, and it is not victorious. And so I think it's meant to be a monument that life, the dignity of life, is more powerful. So last week, I believe it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, the governor in New York City decided to light up this One World Trade Center building to celebrate something. And he decided to light it up to celebrate the new laws that they have passed on abortion. Now, these new laws on abortion are going to allow for many, many more abortions to occur in New York City, or in New York. And the governor was so proud and so excited. He felt like it was a victory of rights. He wanted to light up this building just to show the whole city this victory. And I have to tell you, it is a moment of spiritual insanity. It is absolute hypocrisy. This building symbolizes victory over one group, a terrorist group that decided that there was another group of people whose lives had no value or dignity, so they had the right to kill them. It is victory over that. And here the governor is lighting up the building to celebrate laws where they have decided that they have power to determine that there's a group of people that have no value or dignity, so they can take their lives. They have the right to kill them. Absolute hypocrisy. I don't know if you want to call it spiritual terrorism or just spiritual insanity. Let's talk about the victory, huh? Let's talk about how we get there. How we conquer this form of spiritual insanity. I'm going to go through a couple principles. These are basic principles. My intent here is not just to talk about abortion as like a political issue in the United States. So let's talk about some principles that we hold ourselves to, and we can catch ourselves very easily going off track, even on this issue when we begin to go down the path of hatred or anger, okay? Then Satan is the only one who wins when we do that. So here's the first principle. These are some basic principles on life that we need to just keep in mind. There is never, ever There is never ever a time or a place or never circumstances when it is permissible or good to take innocent human life. There are no circumstances that would permit that at all. It is never good to take innocent human life. Whether they are unborn or whether they are already born, whether they're elderly, whether they're handicapped, there is never a situation where you can take the life of unborn. It's very basic. Children understand this. Children only begin to forget it when we as adults teach them to forget it. Very simple. Let's be faithful to that. The second principle is this. All human life has equal value and dignity. All human life. You know the person that you completely disagree with? They have equal in value and dignity as you do, as I do. Any differentiation you can think of, the most hardened sinner who's on death row, the serial killer, their life has equal value and dignity as our own lives. That's hard, isn't it? Because we draw distinctions all the time. I know I do it. You know, they say don't judge a book by its cover. I do it all the time. And I try not to, but it's my pride. When I disagree with someone, I immediately think I'm right. Obviously, right? Because I am. No, just kidding. But I immediately think I'm right. And so what do? I begin to lower in my mind the dignity and the value of that other person. Now that it's pride, it's spiritual insanity, it's evil, but we do it. A few years ago, I was present at a C-section that was being done for one of my parishioners. So it was a husband and wife. So the wife was in the hospital having a C-section done. And the reason I was there standing right next to her and the husband and the doctor who was doing the C-section was because their baby had no kidneys. And a baby that has no kidneys will live normally only for a few minutes once the baby's born. And so they were going to do a C-section so that they could make absolutely sure that I would have enough time as the priest being there to baptize their baby. I have to say it was an incredible experience. It's amazing how fast they do C-sections. It's like they're just unzipping a zipper. I mean, that baby was out. So I baptized their little baby, and for about 40 minutes, that baby was loved. That baby lived and was loved. Was it heartbreaking? Absolutely. Was it very difficult? Absolutely. But the dignity and the value of the life of that baby for those 40 minutes was no less than you or me. That baby had the right to everything that we have a right to. And I watched that baby receive every bit of that. As long as God decided that that baby was going to live here on earth, that baby was loved and cared for and protected. In the United States, over 90% of all babies that are diagnosed with Down syndrome in the womb, in utero, are aborted. Why? Because of fear. That's all it is. It's just fear. There's no love there. And so we rob those children of their dignity and value because of our selfish fear. Which leads us to the third principle. The third principle is this, is that when we do have difficult decisions to make, and we do, right? We do have difficult decisions to make. I'm not trying to lower the difficulty of what it's like as a parent to know that your child maybe has a difficulty or handicapped or something like that. I understand that's hard. But when we're in those difficult moments, we have two possible paths. One is to love, to act on love, or to act on fear. Now, fear is always self-centered because it's always about preserving the self. It's always about protecting something about the self. That's why it's fear, right? But love is overcoming that, and it's being able to be out there and to act on behalf of the other person. And so when every human being has equal value and dignity, the person who's acting in love will then, in a sense, elevate the other because of that equal value and dignity. And in some sense, they look upon themselves secondary to that of the other person. This is where it goes from being natural, just equal, to supernatural. This is Jesus on the cross, right? There's this beautiful sentence from Jeremiah. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I dedicated you. A prophet to the nations, I appointed you. All of this is language of love. It's all about finding and cherishing and seeing someone and elevating them, even from before their existence, even before they're born, even before they're able to take on that role as prophet. There's a beautiful example of this in Saint Gemma, she was a mother, but she was also a doctor, so she was very in tune with medical science. She wasn't ignorant of these things. And when she was pregnant, she was diagnosed with cancer. And in order to treat the cancer, they were encouraging her to do it while she was pregnant, but she understood the circumstances, and that meant that her baby would most likely die. And it was a very difficult situation because she was permitted to do the treatment. According to our own teachings, she could have done it even if the child was going to die, because there was a secondary effect that she did not desire. Nobody desired it. Nobody wanted that child to die. And so she could have chosen that. She could have chosen to done the treatment while she was pregnant, even if it meant her child would probably die. Or she could have waited for the treatment and chose to protect her child, right? And putting her own life at risk. And she chose to do that. She chose to protect her child. She chose not to do the cancer treatment until she had given birth. And she subsequently died from the cancer. Again, very, very difficult, very painful, I'm sure, for the family. But what a witness of love. Heroic love. Supernatural love, right? Victory over spiritual insanity. To anyone who would go to a mother and say, you should abort your child. No, there's victory over that spiritual insanity. She abided by all three of those principles. It was beautiful what she did. I want to talk a little bit just about some issues that sometimes people aren't very familiar with. So an unborn baby, the heart of an unborn baby starts beating at about 20 days after conception. 20 days after conception, right? Less than 3 weeks. Most women don't even know they're pregnant. In fact, I'm not sure very many women would even know that they were pregnant at that time, right? And that little heart starts beating. And what that means is that every surgical abortion that is done stops that beating heart. Now that heart is going to beat, that same heart is going to beat from those 20 days all the way up until that person breathes their last breath 80 years later. But in an abortion, it intentionally stops that heart. When people say that this is not yet a human life, that's a lie. It is a human life. We don't have the right to stop that heart. Sometimes people will say, they'll say, like if we're standing down at Planned Parenthood and we're praying, somebody will drive by and they'll say, well, all you care about is the unborn. You don't care about the babies that are already here. You don't care about the children in foster care. You don't care about the handicapped children that are struggling. You don't care about this. You don't care about that. And again, you have to confront the lie, because it is spiritual insanity. There is no other institution in the world that cares more for people who are living here on earth than the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church pioneered all forms of treatment in so many ways. Hospitals, nursing homes, hospice care, the kinds of care that the Catholic Church provides. There is no other institution in the world that even comes close to the amount of charity and love that the Catholic Church provides free of charge to the world. You confront the lie. It is a lie. But what if the Catholic Church only cared about the people who are here, and then the unborn babies, we said, you know what, we really don't care about you. We draw the line at birth. What if we were to do that? Absolute hypocrisy. We would need to be held accountable for that. That would be spiritual insanity. It's an absurdity to draw the line at this point and say, nope, that's insanity. Science has proved that that's insanity. That it's not true. And when people continue to believe something that's not true, again, that's insanity. And so I think confronting that. The New York laws that they have enacted, here in Washington State, we already have most of those laws. Our laws are very permissive when it comes to abortion and late-term abortion. One of their laws, though, says that the reason that they want to permit late-term abortion is when a child is not going to be viable. The child is not going to live outside the womb. Kind of like a baby without kidneys. We do not have the right to murder that child. No one does. That child deserves to be loved, even if it's just for a few minutes. Some of the other things that they put in that law was that the reasons that they wanted to be able to have late-term abortions is because to protect the life of the mother. I want to confront another lie here. They're using that as a political tool to get compassion from people, to get people to think that they need to protect the mother, right? This is a reason where we would need to protect the mother. The thing is that in a late-term abortion, there would never ever be a medical reason to do that. In a late-term pregnancy, there would never ever be a medical reason to do an abortion to save the life of the mother. A late-term abortion is a very, very difficult procedure. It's very hard on the woman's body. And if her life was in danger, they would never do an abortion. They would do a C-section. C-sections are very easy to be done. As I said, it's almost like they're unzipping a zipper. I mean, they get that baby out of there immediately. Within a couple minutes, that baby's out. And then the baby would get to live. And so it's a fallacy. It's never needed. The abortion is never needed in order to save the life of a mother. Now, there are times where there's difficult decisions to be made. There are circumstances where that is true. There are some hard decisions. But in a late-term abortion, late-term pregnancy, there's never a reason to do an abortion to save the life of the mother. Now, one of the things, they already know that, but they were doing it to get people concerned about the mother. The other thing that it says is that they want to do it to protect the health of the mother. Well, health is defined by our government, by the federal government, as anything that would affect the woman physically, mentally, or emotionally. Which basically means that the mother can make up any reason to have this abortion if it's going to affect her emotionally. And so what this does is it permits these abortions all the way up to birth for any reason whatsoever. And they know that. There really are no restrictions when you look at the law and how it's defined. It is spiritual insanity. In the second reading, St. Paul writes this beautiful dissertation on what love is. It's so beautiful that it's read at almost every single wedding. Couples love this. It's where Paul's talking about what true love is and what it is not, right? And to think that someone would kill love, to think that someone would kill an innocent child is insane. And the reality is we have to fight that. Because there is insanity in our world. I go down to Planned Parenthood, we go down to Planned Parenthood to pray, because those children deserve to have someone pay attention to them, even if it's just to have someone pray there by them. You see, when 9/11 happened, I was afraid, and so I didn't even want to watch the deaths of these people. Not because I didn't want to watch their deaths, but because I was afraid of the hatred in my own heart. We have to conquer that hatred and just be there to love. To every single person, just to be there to love them and to love the spiritual insanity right out of them. If they're doing evil, we love it right out of them. Love is more powerful. And when people hear about these laws in New York, I know many people are getting angry and they're getting hateful, and get over that, pray through that, ask Jesus to forgive you of that, because that's not going to help. What we need is people who are going to love those babies and love the mothers and love the abortion doctors and love that spiritual insanity right out of them, and our politicians. All right. I think that was everything I wanted to share with you today. So, many blessings on you, and I will see you next week. God bless.